Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. In this video, I'll be showcasing the level 90 Amos Bow versus the level 90 Skyward Harp and the level 90 Prototype Crescent, all at refinement level 1. GanYu is at C0 with level 10 normal attack and level 6 burst. Her stats and artifacts are shown on the screen, and she is using the Blizzard Strayer 4-piece set. Now, one thing to keep in mind about my artifacts is that they provide a good balance between attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage. Let's first understand the weapons before moving forward. The Amos Bow adds damage the longer an arrow is in flight. Due to the delay on the bloom itself gains more arrow fly time than the arrow itself. The Skyward Harp is a crit stat focused bow. It has crit rate as the substat and crit damage as an added bonus. Next is the Prototype Crescent, which is the most free to play accessible option here. After hitting a weak point, it provides a 36% attack boost to your character. For the showcases, they'll be structured as follows. From left to right, we will have the Skyward Harp, the Amos Bow, and the Prototype Crescent. This first showcase will be demonstrating the power of her level 2 charge shots. In this example, the Amos Bow 5-shotted Pyro Regisvine, while the Skyward Harp 6-shotted it and the Prototype Crescent 7-shotted it. Surprisingly, Pyro Regisvine actually has no weak points to proc the Prototype Crescent's attack buff. As such, this example demonstrates the Prototype Crescent at its weakest without a weak point to hit and therefore without its 36% attack boost. Now, as expected, the Amos did the most bloom damage, and the Skyward Harp did more damage than the Prototype Crescent. Now, all three bows performed excellently in my opinion, but let's summarize the data we have so far. There are a few things to clarify about these numbers. First, this is all based on my GanYu stats. These are average damage numbers, which factor in if you crit or didn't crit. This is also with the Blizzard Strayer set, and assumes a 55% bonus crit rate, 15% from the Cryo Party Resonance, 20% from the Blizzard Strayer hitting an enemy with Cryo on it, and 20% from GanYu's Ascension. For the Amos Bow calculations, it's also assuming a 0.5 second arrow fly time for the bloom damage. The percent column indicates how much damage the weapon does in relation to the Amos Bow at refinement 1. For example, the Prototype Crescent, without its attack buff, does 67% of a refinement 1 Amos Bow for its bloom damage, whereas the Skyward Harp does 73% of a refinement 1 Amos Bow's bloom damage. On the left, we also have refinements 1, 3, and 5 for comparison's sake. This math was reflected fairly accurately through the previous damage showcase, with the Amos Bow only needing 5 shots, the Skyward Harp needing 6 shots, and the Prototype Crescent needing 7 shots. So this isn't looking so great for the Prototype Crescent because it doesn't have its attack buff up. So let's see how well it does when it does have its attack buff. Like last time, from left to right we have the Skyward Harp, Amos Bow, and then the Prototype Crescent. Now, one weird thing to know about these flying robots is that I couldn't proc the Prototype Crescent's attack buff by shooting its eye, hence why I first shoot the Hilichurl on the right. Anyway, as expected, the Amos Bow is still the clear winner. Now, while the Prototype Crescent's attack buff is up, it performed very similarly to the Skyward Harp. You can see that the bloom damage number itself for the Prototype Crescent is actually larger compared to the Skyward Harp, at 21,600 versus 19,800 respectively. Looking at this updated chart with the Prototype Crescent with its attack buff up, we can see that now the Prototype Crescent and the Skyward Harp do a similar amount of damage to each other. Both the bows are around 3/4 of a refinement 1 Amos Bow's damage. Now, if you're lucky enough to eventually get the Prototype Crescent to refinement 5, it will end up doing around 85% of a refinement 1 Amos Bow. Now, it is noteworthy that even at refinement 1, the Amos Bow is still the clear winner for GanYu's charge shots. But hey, for a free-to-play bow, the Prototype Crescent is quite impressive. In fact, it being comparable to the Skyward Harp is a testament to its power, at least with the Blizzard Strayer set that I'm using. Now many of you may be wondering about the Blackcliff Warbow, and don't worry, I've got you covered. Unfortunately, since I don't have the resources to level a Blackcliff Warbow up to level 90, I can't demonstrate it in the game for you. However, I can easily do the math and here are the results. The Blackcliff Warbow has crit damage as its substat, and gains 12% attack after killing an enemy for up to 3 stacks. It is purchasable every couple months or so, 3 at a time for 24 star glitter each. What's interesting about the Blackcliff Warbow is that it performs very similarly to the Prototype Crescent, both without its buff and with its buff. Keep in mind that the Blackcliff is only comparable to the Prototype Crescent when it has all 3 kill stacks up, so at 1 stack or 2 stacks it will be doing less damage than the Prototype Crescent with its attack buff up. Now before I go into which weapon you should consider choosing, let's take a look at a couple burst showcases. The first burst showcase will compare, from left to right, the Skyward Harp, the Amos Bow, and the Prototype Crescent without its attack buff. We can see here that the Skyward Harp did the best, with the Amos Bow at 2nd place and the Prototype Crescent in 3rd place. Nonetheless, all 3 bows still did a lot of damage to Pyro Regisfine. Doing the math, we have the following chart. The Prototype Crescent, without its buff, does 88% of the damage that the Amos Bow does, and the Skyward Harp does 115% of the damage that the Amos Bow does. Now let's see how the Prototype Crescent does when it has its buff up. Unfortunately, since the robot took a charged level 2 shot to the face, that will slightly offset the results a bit, but they all ended up doing a similar amount of damage. In retrospect, I should have used a weaker archer to shoot it out of the sky, but oh well, this will still get the point across. The Prototype Crescent with its buff up does pretty much the same amount of damage as the Amos Bow, while the Skyward Harp is still doing 15% more damage. Next, after doing the math for the Blackcliff Warbow, here's the full chart. Just like for the bloom damage, the Blackcliff Warbow performs nearly identically to the Prototype Crescent, with and without their respective buffs up. So the clear winner for GanYu's burst damage is the Skyward Harp, followed by a refined Prototype Crescent and refined Blackcliff Warbow, and then the Amos Bow. And in last place, the Prototype Crescent and Blackcliff Warbow do the least amount of damage without their buffs up. So that's a lot of information, and I'm still not sure that I've answered your question of which weapon, besides the Amos Bow, should you consider. There are many factors to consider when choosing which weapon you should use for your GanYu. The topics I'll be discussing are availability, builds, stats/artifacts, and lastly, playstyle. We'll start off with availability. In order of priority, you should answer the following questions. Do you have the Amos Bow and plan to use charge shots? Then just use the Amos Bow. Do you have the Skyward Harp and want to maximize burst damage and don't need it on another character like Child? Well, then just use the Skyward Harp. Do you have the Skyward Harp, the Prototype Crescent, or the Blackcliff Warbow already leveled and don't need it on another character? No, just use one of those. Do you have access to a lot of refinements for the Prototype Crescent and or the Blackcliff Warbow? Then consider one of them. And I'll break down in more detail in the next section for choosing between non-Amos Bow weapons. And after all that, if you still have none of the above, I guess you can consider any other 4-star bow or even some 3-star bows. The next topic will be deciding based on build stats and artifact. Besides the Amos Bow, choosing between the Prototype Crescent, the Blackcliff Warbow, and a crit rate substat bow like the Skyward Harp or Viridescent Hunt can be tricky. First of all, are you using the Blizzard Strayer set? If yes, then unless your crit rate rolls on your artifacts are very low, you probably don't need the crit rate from Skyward Harp or the Viridescent Hunt. That leaves you with the Prototype Crescent versus the Blackcliff Warbow. The next thing to consider is, how did your artifact substats roll? If you have great crit damage and crit rate rolls, and almost no attack percent, then the Prototype Crescent is likely to add a bit more damage than the Blackcliff Warbow. If you have a ton of attack percent and crit rate, but very low crit damage rolls, then the Blackcliff Warbow is likely to add more damage than the Prototype Crescent. Remember, you want to maximize your average damage, and to do so you have to balance your attack stat with your crit stats, and your crit stats should be at a 1:2 ratio between crit rate and crit damage respectively. For the average person with an average distribution of substat rolls, both weapons are likely to perform very similarly for charge shots. Now for any other artifact set combination that's not the Blizzard Strayer 4-piece, like the Wanderer's 4-piece as an example, crit rate substat bows like the Skyward Harp and Viridescent Hunt become much more valuable to reach that 1:2 crit ratio. Keep in mind that if you're trying to maximize bloom damage, you still gain 20% crit rate on subsequent Frostflake arrows from her ascension, and you'll want to balance your 1:2 crit rate to crit damage ratio with this in mind. The next bit of advice I can give you is to think about your playstyle. Do you enjoy aiming and shooting weak spots? Well, consider the Prototype Crescent. Do you hate aiming and just want to swap to GanYu, cast her E, cast her burst, and then swap out? Well, the Blackcliff Warbow will probably be a better option. Do you plan to mostly use GanYu as support for proccing melt and other elemental reactions? Then you can even consider an energy recharge bow, like the Favonius or Sacrificial Bow. Now, are you risk averse and want guaranteed progression? Well, you'll get more star glitter eventually, and you can guaranteed refine the Blackcliff Warbow by playing the game, unlike the extremely RNG reliant Prototype Crescent, where you'll have to pray for the Northlander bow prototypes to drop. So there you go. I know that was a lot of information and I didn't tell you exactly which bow that you should use. And that's because everyone's game accounts and everyone's bank accounts are different, so you should decide what's best for you. Here's a larger chart that I made which factors in more weapons for their bloom damage that you can reference. I'll also have a link to this spreadsheet in the description and in a pinned comment. Now I know my spreadsheet is a bit messy and not 100% accurate in terms of the math, but I'm confident enough in it that I'm willing to share it with you guys. As always, thanks for watching. This video took a lot of effort to make, so yeah. Now I regularly make analytical content and various character showcases for Genshin Impact. So if this is the type of stuff that appeals to you, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed, liked, and commented. As always, thanks for watching. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.